this is what we're always working towards, which is how can we help each other be as honest and real and grounded in the present moment as possible, you know? So today we're going to talk about why you keep finding yourself stuck in the same loops of behavior and find it very difficult to move beyond it, and what you can actually do to start looking at these things and finding a plan to break these cycles. This is one of the core things that people come to me for therapy with. In fact, you know, most of us don't really seek out therapy unless in some way we are stuck in some form of like contradictory loop in our behavior, something where we feel very stuck, right? Perhaps you are repeatedly finding yourself in these anxious, avoidant kind of relationship dynamics. Maybe you find yourself in an environment where you feel it's necessary to look after everyone else, but you really struggle to receive and get help in return. Or perhaps you feel very lonely and isolated and you really struggle to take action and change things, even though you really want more connection. You want more community around you, more connection. So the place that we get stuck with these is, well, there's an unconscious belief at play, right? And it's very hard to see them in the first place. And the trickiest thing is the unconscious belief creates behavior within us that almost self-perpetuates and maintains the integrity of the belief. And so very often in the first place, we actually don't even know what the belief is that we're working with. But within it, there'll always be something which self-validates to maintain the structure of what that belief is trying to protect you from. So if you if it was dangerous for you to be open and happy and sociable and connect with people, even if you desperately want to make friends and you want to go out and you want to talk to people and all that kind of thing, the belief that's protecting you, which is it's risky to make friends, it's risky to open yourself up, will keep you very closed. And so when there are bids for connection, when people are trying to make contact with you, when people are open to conversation, the part of you that's afraid very often will hide eye contact, right? Will not reciprocate, will not be open to those. And you can think of it like the fear that comes with that changes the way that you perceive the world, right? You literally see the world differently depending on your emotional state. So if you are in a state of fear, if you have this fear, particularly if it's around, say, socializing, but it might be even more generally as well, if you get onto the bus and there's someone making eye contact with you, if there's this underlying level of fear within your system, your default is going to see this eye contact as a threat, right? Whereas if you're in a much more open and positive state and maybe you're full of love and joy, right, and you get on the bus and someone makes eye contact with you, the emotional state that you're in means that you will receive that stimulus differently. So you're much more likely to interpret that as a bid for connection. Maybe you said, "Oh, you're right, how you doing?" You know, start a conversation because you already feel open enough to be able to do so. Where a lot of people struggle is they feel like they have to learn a specific skill in order to be able to change these things. And it's not exactly that's the case. One of the best things you can do is just start questioning whether there might be another perspective that allows you to interpret the situation you're in any differently. Just question whether or not that is the only thing that you can see. Because you don't necessarily need to be any better at having a conversation in order to start a conversation with a stranger just like that on the street, right? The thing is, if you are learning a skill in order to be better at a certain thing, all that really is doing is giving you the confidence to believe that it's safe to have a conversation with someone on the street. And this is where so many people get stuck thinking that they have to learn something specific in order to fix themselves. You know, what we do in integration is almost the opposite of that. You don't need to learn a better skill. You don't need to learn something else in order to navigate these situations. You actually just need to come to terms with the part of yourself that you're afraid to show. So if in that dynamic, you're afraid to connect, because it was dangerous to connect. Where we would be focusing in a session is how to make peace with if you aren't well received by somebody. Because, for me, if you think about confidence, there's two sides to confidence, let's say. And the first one is, as I've said, if you learn a specific skill, you can navigate a very narrow bandwidth of the whole of reality effectively. If you want to be a public speaker, you learn how to speak in a certain way, you learn how to present, you learn how to have rhythm and pace, you learn how to not say and do all these kind of things. And you might be really polished and you might be really effective and have a really professional way of going about things, but that only works within that really narrow bandwidth. True confidence, the way that I see it, is being fine even if the worst thing possible happens. In which case you're able to be much more natural. You can go up on stage unprepared, you can connect with the audience, you can kind of ask questions, and you can kind of freestyle a little bit. Now, obviously it's useful if you actually do have some skills in an area. It's useful if you have practiced some public speaking and you have some tips and you have some idea of how to structure a speech, something like that. But if you are able to come to terms with being all right, even if the worst happens, it completely frees you to just be natural. Okay, so back to the bus situation. If you are able to get on the bus, say hello to someone, and even if they completely ignore you, if they give you the daggers, if they, are rude, and it doesn't make it mean anything about you, you are completely free to talk to whoever you want. So in the integration sessions, what we're looking for is to find the pattern of behavior that you are stuck with and reverse engineer and find out what the opposite part of it is that you have been unable to accept. So another example I gave at the start, which was if you find yourself in a situation where you are looking after everyone else and you never feel like you are receiving anything in return, there's something within that which it makes it not all right for you to receive, really. And very often the attempts to be there for everyone else are trying to keep people at an arm's length, because it's not been safe for me to actually sit back and relax and receive, and allow other people to be there for us. Now, these things all happen at different levels and at different times. And, for a lot of guys that I speak with, very often men have to be the ones that are holding everyone else and they have to be supporting their families and whatever. But if we're the ones that are struggling, if we are the ones still going through something and we don't then have someone that we can then lean on, sooner or later we're going to break, we're going to drop stuff. And that's a learning thing that, all of us need to look at to some level, to learn to be able to let go of the control, let other people be there for us. Another great example, the anxious avoidant dynamic, right? That's a really interesting one to talk about, because what's really going on underneath the anxious avoidant thing is the anxious person really is needing their partner to respond in a very specific way in order for them to feel safe. Whereas the avoidant partner is afraid that if they share authentically how they feel, then it won't be received well and they'll feel punished by it. At some level it's that, and there's extremes where it gets a bit murky, and maybe there's some like control things going on, maybe not, I don't know. But within that, at some level, that is what's going on. And so for both sides, what needs to happen, which feels the opposite, because the avoidant person feels like they need a bit more space to process, they need to kind of pull back, but all that does is accentuate the response in the other person. And the anxious person is desperate to just have a bit of like certainty to give them that sense of control. And what they actually both need to do is be okay even if the worst happens, right? And one of the things that I try and put into situations like that is giving people the tools to be able to say, like, I feel like this right now, but it doesn't mean such and such about the relationship, particularly for someone who's avoidant. If they have tools in place early on to be like, I don't feel very connected to you now, I don't even necessarily feel very loving towards you right now, that doesn't mean I don't want to be in a relationship. Something like that is a really useful tool because it gives the clarity that's needed. But very often they won't even be able to come forward and actually say something like that because they're worried about the response from their partner. There's a concern there that they're going to hurt someone, right? And on the anxious side of that, being okay with hearing that is such an important thing. If you aren't able to let your partner authentically tell them that they don't feel connected with you, how can someone be authentic in your relationship? This is what we're always working towards, which is how can we help each other be as honest and real and grounded in the present moment as possible. The anxious person in many ways is holding on to a projection of how they want things to be rather than being in the present moment of the reality of the relationship. And the avoidant person is unable to own authentically the reality of where they are. And so because they can't meet the projection and they can't own the reality, they're then suppressed and they disappear. So both of them are processes of bringing ourselves back to the reality. Right now, this is how I feel. Right now, this is the reality of what we're in. We're not trying to make things different. We're accepting the reality of where we find ourselves. I hope that helps a little bit. I feel like I rambled a lot today, but as I say, these kind of patterns and loops where we get stuck, this is the core of most of integration work, is identifying the places where we do feel stuck and then reverse engineering them in order to identify the part of ourselves that still needs a bit of love, a bit of appreciation, a bit of acceptance. And then we expand as a person because we can hold that possibility as well. We don't make it mean something about ourselves if the worst case scenario happens. If you're working through any problems like this, I do have availability at the moment. You can find a link in the description to book a consultation with me. Thanks for listening. I'll see you soon.